At the outset, I wish to thank Sheilahar Heritage Services and Sandeep Dahisarkar for giving this opportunity to me to speak with you on converging history and geography. The basic objective of my talk is basically to explain with few examples from Mumbai and Konkan that how geography and history uh, are not two separate, two different disciplines, but actually are a very complementing disciplines, and therefore converging the two becomes a very significant perspective to look at our world. So let us begin with our presentation. Now, first of all, let me put the thing in a bit of perspective that whenever we try to delimit the boundaries of knowledge, especially into different subjects as we call it, or different disciplines as we call it, and when we become too rigid with those boundaries, then certainly there are problems, because these actually are that is looking at different perspectives as subjects actually creates a problem. Rather, they put a lot of rigid boundaries between and among the subjects, and then we really lose a very important perspective which is very interdisciplinary in nature. And therefore, looking at the subjects as perspective, not as two watertight compartments, not as two different entities, is something very important for our understanding, especially about our world, because that will help us to open up the vistas and open up the understanding and open up the way we think about, or the way we perceive about our own world. Now, with this point, today we'll talk about history and geography, these two important subjects as they are called, but I'm looking at them as perspectives. If you read this quote by an English explorer, John Smith, who says that as geography without history seemed a carcass without motion, so history without geography wandereth as a vagrant without a certain habitation. It simply means that if you study geography without bringing history in it, or if you study history without bringing geography in it, then it is just as good as a carcass, or as good as a person having no habitation, no permanent habitation. Now, this quote just tells us that though every subject has got a very unique identity, still they do share the roots, and sharing of these roots becomes extremely important, and that is what we are going to talk about. So it is instead of talking about boundaries between two subjects, let us talk about the frontiers, because when we say frontier between history and geography, then we are looking at more open areas with more possibilities and opportunities for assimilation, coming together, complementing each other with our own unique perspectives of history as well as geography, and then converging these two, making both as a very complementary to each other, instead of conflicting with each other. We very much know that these two perspectives have their very own unique identities. History, for example, fundamentally studies time, or specifically period, while geography fundamentally studies the aspect of space, again to be specific, the concept of place. And because history basically is a study of time, or studies with the perspective of time, the process becomes very fundamental. The question of how becomes very important to history, because it is the process that becomes very important, or rather a very fundamental premise of this particular perspective. While for geography, being a spatial science, it is the pattern that becomes more important, right? So where it is process of change is important for history, for geographers it is the composition, the making of that pattern, and how the patterns transform over time becomes a very important aspect. Now, these two fundamental concepts of space and time, or period and place, cannot be understood if these two kept away from each other. For example, only studying process will not lead us to anything unless we understand what is the result of that process and which is the pattern. So I look at pattern as a result of process, and therefore to understand geography or to understand history, knowing this process pattern relationship becomes extremely important. Now, these are now this is a fundamental a diagram that shows that how when the subject matter of both these disciplines or both these perspectives of history and geography come together, when they converge, then that lead to multiple perspectives. Okay, and as you can see in the diagram, there lies historical geography, where you look at history from geographical perspective. Historical geography is a very significant branch of human geography, while there is also a field of geographical history, that is studying geography from historical understanding. So you will find that there are two different, in historical geography the perspective is geographical, thus the subject matter is history, or the problem is history. While if you see geographical history, then you will find that the perspective is historical, but we are looking into the role of geography in the process. And this process pattern relationship becomes extremely important. Now, whenever we talk about geography, location, environment, and landscape, these are very fundamental or rather principal discourses of this subject. And region, areas, places, these are the things, these are the objects of study for geographers. But when we build time into it, when we try to weave time into all these discourses, okay, then there comes the role of historical geography. Because location is not going to remain static, environment is not going to remain static, landscape is not going to remain static. These things are going to change over the period of time. And therefore, to understand the pattern, it is so important to understand the process that makes that particular pattern. And this is the in particular thing that we will try to understand now with few examples from the Mumbai and Konkan region. Let us talk briefly about the case of Mahim, Thane, and Kalwa, the places in this region of Mumbai, and let us understand how these three were connected or have a very unique relationship in the medieval times. We all of us know that Konkan is an extremely important coast, an extremely important region, a historical region, not just because of its own, but because of the connectivity. When we talk about network, then Konkan becomes extremely important, because to connect the Red Sea network with the Red Sea routes with the Malabar, and then further into the Indian Ocean, the Konkan plays a very important link between the two. So it forms like a vertical link, but at the same time, Konkan also forms a very important horizontal link, where the interior areas and especially the plateau region comes in contact with the Konkan. Okay, and the role is played by all these various ports that develop throughout history in the along the coast of Konkan, because these ports actually worked like the connectors. So they connected the Red Sea route, the route coming from the north and the route going to the south, as well as the route going to the west, or coming from a route going to the east, and then route coming to the west. So these ports played an extremely significant role. The Mumbai region was one of the very important areas of the Konkan as far as historical region is concerned. And in this map, you can see a more broader picture, where you can see there were various inland ports, especially the river ports like Kalyan, and then we have these islands of Mumbai. So we have these 7 islands, as we call them, as we know them historically, and this is the island of Salsette or Sasti, as we know it. Now, this particular region, in this particular map shows some important ports that were in existence in the medieval period, and this particular area, this particular map shows that how the connection with the Kalyan or the riverine ports of Kalyan with the ports of this entire region of Mumbai and Sasti. And this particular region becomes a very important, because in the medieval times there was a place which is Mahim, which was of extremely importance or significance. Now, to understand Mahim, it is imperative to bring the reference of Mahikawatichi Bakar, a very important document of 15th century that actually talks about medieval Mumbai of about from say 12th century to 14th century. And in this document talks about the entire story of the Mahim Island of Mumbai region, as you can see in this particular map. This particular region was extremely important. Okay, first of all, because of this crescent shaped islands and the headlands that we find the Varali and the Bandra headlands. So we find that this gives a kind of a natural shelter for the development of ports. And as you can see, this opening to the north of this island, which facilitated the movements of boats through it along the flood tide and the ebb tides. And from here, the boats used to move inside or in the interior parts and move ahead towards the other islands as well as towards the Sasti island. Now, this region itself has its own resources at the same time. This region was known for the cultivation of rice. The region was known for mangoes and salt, as well as for fishing and toddy cultivation. And obviously, the region had a very long tradition of navigation. And as a result of that, the resources available in this region, the human as well as natural, played a very significant role in the rise of this particular island of Mahim. Now, coming back to this particular map, as you can see that this is the location of Mahim, and this is the Sasti island and the maps of Mumbai, as you can see, the islands of Mumbai. And as these are fundamentally islands, if one wants to access these islands or approach these islands, especially from the mainland, then there is only way to do it is to cross over the creek. So the creek actually provided a very important security to this particular island. And we know that this is the place where the important city, or important settlement, historical settlement of Thane also grew in this particular region, especially when the Kalyan declined. We find that the Thane came into focus. Now we find that there are evidences or explanations where we find that many times the boat movement also used to come from the North Konkan coast. The boats used to enter through the mouth of Ullas Valley, Ullas River, and then they used to come all over from this Ullas Creek, and they used to be connected with the Thane Creek. Now, those days, obviously, Thane Creek was not silted the way as it is today, and therefore, this particular region where the Thana is located becomes an extremely important region. So, in a way, we can say Thane forms as a kind of a gateway for the region of Mahim when we look at from the land side, and that particular location especially becomes very important. Historians like Farishta has mentioned that during 15th century, early 15th century, the seat of power was shifted from Thane to Bombay Mahim, right? And even Barbosa, the traveler, also talks about a region. Barbosa calls this region with a very interesting name as Tana Mayambu. Now this Tana Mayambu is one word, but it actually talks about Thane, Mahim and Mumbai. So the way that these places in conjunction, they were known as one region. So this geographical unity is extremely important in terms of Mahim, in terms of Thane and Mumbai. So Thane and the location was extremely important. However, when we talk in terms of coming from the coast, coming from the mainland to these islands, okay, and Thane is located on the island, and therefore it is the place of Kalwa that becomes important. Why especially Kalwa becomes important? Because here you can see the Thane Creek is quite wide, but this is the place where it is considerably narrow, and therefore it is a bit easier to cross over from the mainland to the island. And here is located, and here is Kalwa, which is an important historical place that is located. If we refer to Bahikawati Bakhar, then we find that there are various instances that Bakhar explains. Bakhar gives a lot of explanation, descriptions of various battles that were fought in the region, and there are various battles that fought at Kalwa. So Kalwa emerges as a very prominent battlefield of medieval Mumbai. So it can be the 12th century battles, or it can be 13th century battles, as you can see in the slide. Many battles took place in this region. So why Kalwa become such an important battleground of medieval Mumbai? The importance, or the reason goes to its very unique location. Okay, Kalwa is located on this particular island, this particular side, and as you can see, there is creek on one side, the Thana Creek on this side, and I mean to the west of Kalwa, while to the east we find a range of Mumbra Hill or Parsik Hill, as we call it today. So it's a very narrow part of land, narrow stretch of land between the creek and this hill range, and therefore anybody coming from here to approach Thane and this particular island, it was Kalwa that always has been a battleground. And the Bakhar explains in such an important way that how certain communities like Tandele, the fishermen communities, the communities he knew who also knew the boat navigation, they played very significant role in the in these battles, because Bakhar explains how the people from these communities especially played a very heroic roles in winning those battles for their kings. And therefore this so to understand Mahim, to understand Mumbai Island, it becomes important to understand the role of Kalwa as a battlefield from the point of view as Kalwa as a gateway to the island of Mumbai as we approach from the mainland. And even if you see the photograph of Kalwa just 50 years before, okay, and still you find it was such an quite an empty land. So obviously in those days, this empty land played a very important role as a battlefield. So this is one example. Now from medieval Mumbai, let us come to colonial example of Vengurla. We know that Vengurla is located in Sindhudurg district, and it is very close to the border. It is very close to Goa, and it is this location of Vengurla with the location of Vengurla vis-a-vis Goa plays a very important role in making that port an important place of significance, a very important, though it's short-lived port, but in that short life, Vengurla played an extremely significant role. But it is not just location. The location or the existing location should fit into the spatial strategy of the then powerful people. So and as you can see here, Vengurla also this northern headland, as you can see, and this northern hilly region to the north, and you can see there is estuary here and there is sandbar, and the movement used to take place from the mouth of estuary right up to the place where the Dutch had their factory or lodge, as it is called. This is a story of around 1630s, 1638, So that is the period when the Dutch established or built their factory at this particular place. Now, why Dutch built factory at this place is obviously their target was Portuguese, and Goa was the Portuguese headquarter, the Portuguese uh, an important place for the Portuguese, rather the capital of their empire, and that is the reason why Dutch decided to attack Goa. However, attacking Goa was very difficult because of its very unique location and the entire unique location of the port itself. And therefore, it was thought that it is only the blockading of this port of Goa will play a major role in driving Portuguese away, and that was the thinking of the Dutch. And they also tried with English, with British. They also tried they also made attempts to blockade this particular port. However, most of those blockades, their attempts were unsuccessful, mainly because they didn't have any place nearby from where they actually can monitor and manage and execute this particular blockade. And then that's the reason why they were actually in search of a place which will help them somewhere close by. And in that search, they got two important places depending upon their geographical location and importance as an harbor, and that was Vengurla, and other was Mount Delhi, that ancient trading center. But obviously, Vengurla won mainly because of the distance between Vengurla and Goa, the proximity to Goa, that played a very significant role. Now, at the same time, so Dutch wanted to have an establishment in Vengurla so that they can execute the blockade. But at the same time, this region was under the Bijapur Sultanate, and this is the period when even Bijapur were wanting to have a control over the port of Goa, and even they wanted to drive away Portuguese, but obviously they needed help of naval power for that. And so when the Dutch went to, or when the Dutch asked or sought for permission to build a stone house at Vengurla, Bijapur certainly gave them a green signal, obviously because they thought that the Dutch Navy will help them, or will be very helpful for them to drive Portuguese away from this particular region. And so Bijapur court gave permission to Dutch to build their factory in Vengurla in about 1638. Now, Vengurla itself is an important place because it was known for an excellent quality of water. It is known for rice. It was mainly known for cardamom, as well as weaving cloth and some matting materials that were produced there in Vengurla. Vengurla also had many salt pans. But if you see the Vengurla and the Bijapur link, the Vengurla was connected with the plateau via Ramghat trade route, and along this route between Bijapur and Vengurla, we find also the important trading centers of Nipani and Raibag. Raibag was very important paper procuring center, and therefore this link also played a very important role for the development of this entrepot port of Vengurla. So here an interesting thing that we are seeing, that Bijapur also had their some objectives in mind, and the Dutch also had some objectives in mind, and the geography came to their help. It's the proximity of Vengurla to Goa, okay, and not only the proximity, it is the, as I said, that the location of Vengurla, this proximity, it actually fitted well in the spatial strategy of Bijapur as well as Dutch simultaneously. Now, this complementarity between these two played a very important role in the growth of Vengurla. This is a picture or lithograph of a Dutch factory in 1850. So this is a lodge that Dutch built in Vengurla. Then that went on to make a very important role rather in the blockades of Goa. And we find that once they took over Vengurla, and then we find that the Dutch executed blockades especially between 1636 to 1644 and between 1657 to 1662, and these were extremely significant blockades of Goa that were executed from Vengurla. So Vengurla acted like not only just a kind of a not only a place of providing providing the necessary help to the member of the crew, but at the same time it worked as an important spying post or the watch post, monitoring the Portuguese affairs, the Portuguese activities, and it was directly reporting to Batavia, and therefore sending information of all Portuguese affair and spying on them and sending that information to Batavia was a very important role of Vengurla. During this period of blockade, Goa was literally cut from the Lisbon and other areas as far as their trade is concerned, and it practically paralyzed the Portuguese in Goa during this period of blockade. So it is Vengurla that actually came to help for Dutch to do this uh, an importance to play this important strategy of the blockade. However, an important turn of events took place in 1662 when there was a peace treaty between the Dutch and the Portuguese, and as a product of that, Dutch got control over Cochin, the very heart of the Malabar spice land. And obviously, as there was a treaty between Portuguese and Dutch, the very premises over which the Vengurla's importance was standing, obviously it got collapsed or it got shaken completely. And that's the point when the Vengurla's importance start declining. So here we can see that how when a particular place plays an important role in the strategy of the powerful, or it can be an economic strategy of the Dutch or more the political strategy of the Bijapur, then that place becomes important. But suddenly this peace treaty and many other events that took place suddenly make that the location of Vengurla quite redundant, out of place as far as the newly evolving strategies are concerned. And then the Vengurla starts declining from that, and today we find that the Dutch factory is in a very bad condition and dilapidated condition. So it's really a good example of how the ports live an ephemeral life, sometimes very short life, but in that short life they serve a very important purpose, and a purpose of the then rulers or the then traders or the merchants. And once that purpose is gone, or when the purpose is cease to exist, then we find that the importance of the place also goes off and the place starts declining. We'll go back to Mumbai Island. We started with the medieval Mumbai, and now we'll go back to the Mumbai Islands, and we'll try to see how the geographical imagination, the very geographical understanding of the people leads to a completely different kind of patterns in case of Mumbai. So let us go to back to colonial Mumbai. Now, all of us know this map of Mumbai Islands, the 7 islands of Mumbai. But though we know it as an islands, they were actually not separate islands. It was actually an archipelago or a group of island, because the central area, this particular central part, used to be underwater, or it used to be inundated, especially during the high tide areas and during the monsoon areas. However, otherwise this area was like very marshy, and many a times it was easier also to walk through this particular area. So in a way, these islands were not independent 7 islands, but actually the part of a group, a single group, or an archipelago. We all of us know that it was an excellent harbor. It was an excellent harbor, but obviously the very conception that whether you look at these islands, as separate independent islands, or you look at these islands as a one single island. Now these different perspectives to look at this region played a very significant role. So just when the Vengurla started declining in 1662, when the peace treaty took place between the Portuguese and the Dutch, it is just before that in 1661, we know that Mumbai was transferred by from Portuguese to the British Crown. And but at that time we know that though the transfer took place in 1661, the actual possession was given much later. And the problem, the very controversy of why the possession was not given immediately, that actually lies or that it is rooted mainly in the varied geographical imagination or geographical understanding of this particular region. If you see this particular Portuguese map, then you can see the Portuguese map doesn't show this, didn't show this island as 7 different islands, but instead it shows it as the 4 islands: island number 1, island number 2, 3, and 4. So it was four. It was a group of 4 islands, and rather 4 independent islands according to Portuguese, and that was the concept. But when Portuguese got this particular island in 1530s, they actually didn't use this island directly. They already had Vasai in their mind, or Basin, Bakem as they used to call it, and which was like a very important place of their northern provinces. And that's the reason why we find that they didn't use these islands much, rather they rented out the lands to noblemen, and they use this particular island for the product like coconut, but otherwise even the food requirements or the agricultural requirements of this place were provided for from the other areas of the northern province. There was actually no kind of a pressure of land. There was no pressure on this particular land, and it was not very well, very effectively used. And as a result, we do not find any that the Portuguese thought of reclaiming this particular island and joining this particular island. So that kind of conception was not there. And that's the reason why when this island went to or transferred to the British Crown, certainly there was a very important issue, and that issue of what exactly these Mumbai islands are made up of. British thought that the Mumbai islands made up of a very big region from much northern coast of these Mumbai islands, and so they thought that it's a pretty big region. So if we actually find out what transpired between 1661 to 1665, the point where the Mumbai was transferred to the point where the actual possession was acquired by the British. So it's a lot of interesting tales are there where we find that these two groups literally fought with each other, or they argued, I mean, with each other as far as what exactly Mumbai is made up of. Okay, and therefore, because the Portuguese were ready to give them the island of Mumbai, but they were not ready to give them Mahim, where the British said that no, Mahim also is a part of Mumbai island, so they should obviously get it. And the very revenue collection authority was situated in Mahim, and so not getting Mahim or not possessing Mahim obviously was a big a problem as far as the British were concerned. And probably when this transfer occurred, I think that the region was not properly delimited. I mean, the region was not properly delineated and described in the copy, because otherwise these differences of opinion wouldn't have arrived. If we see this particular map of Mumbai, or Bombay as it was known in the colonial period, we find that this map doesn't show these islands separately. Especially this shows that Mahim also is a part of it, and especially that the island didn't show the central regions which actually used to be inundated. So where we find this entire view of Portuguese was more maritime in nature, looking at this region as four islands, while the British understood it in a more territorial perspective, because that was finally their aim. They wanted to have Bombay, or such a place which is completely free of competition. They already were there in Surat, but then there was a lot of competition there. The Dutch significance was already rising in Malabar, and therefore they badly required a place of their own where they can develop with their own design and their own aspiration. And then the Bombay became offered that kind of a location, and then British built this kind of a geographical understanding that it is the island reclaimed by them and built by them, but which actually was a one common, one single island, as these historical maps tell us. And then we find that when this the island actually British actually got possession in 1665, and further in 1668 the islands went to the East India Company, and then the idea of reclaiming this island and developing the entire space to build a city came up. And there we know that there were different phases of reclamation that Mumbai went through. So these beautiful maps, made are found on this, made by Noel Murphy in his blog post, and which I am using. So this is the situation in 1670s that showed a different these seven islands basically, and how in coming period, or in the forthcoming period, we find that these islands, or these bridges or these gaps were filled up, and this entire central area, the area that was inundated, because this was the area from where the high tide water used to enter and used to go off, and it used to exit towards the Thane Creek. So all these entry and exit points were closed, and the land was further reclaimed in various stages. So it can be the 1785 or the 18th century phase or the 19th century phase, and various kind of reclamations, and even in the post-independent period this reclamation when continued. And what is important is again that that the very conception, the tussle between what exactly the Mumbai is made up of, four islands, one island, seven island. Now that really played an important role as far as that controversy is concerned. And this very idea that this entire group is actually one island, so which made British to reclaim this entire area. And it's a very important process as a part of the colonial history of Mumbai. But we know, this process actually led to, or it gave rise to a pattern. It gave rise to a one single island made up of this reclamation. One intact, one cohesive kind of a land that was created, over which then we know that British built their city. But when we compare it with the hydrographic maps of Mumbai, and if we find, and when it was tried to map the flood areas or the flood prone areas of Mumbai, then these we can very clearly see that the flood prone areas of Mumbai clearly matches with the erstwhile inundated areas, because these were basically the low lying areas that were reclaimed. Okay, and now in post independent Mumbai we suffer from this problem of this waterlogging and flooding in every rainy season or in every monsoon. So the process that was started in the colonial period of reclamation gave us a pattern in the post-independence period in which there is a new problem. And now here, when we look at process and pattern relationship, one has to understand that pattern further affects the process, or patterns further give rise to new processes or different processes. Okay, and so when we find that these entire areas are now becoming flood prone, and now we are trying to act on it, that how, in what way these floods, these regular flooding areas and the waterlogging areas can fundamentally be managed. In a recent report of IPCC, uh, we all of have seen that it was projected that by 2050, most of the because of the sea level rise as a result of climate change, the coastal areas especially will go underwater, will submerge underwater. And very recently in the research, these areas were very carefully mapped, the probable areas which will submerge underwater, keeping in view the climate change and the sea level, the projected sea level rise by the year 2050. So what we see now in this projection of 2050, okay, we basically find a completely different geography that is emerging, right? And a geography which British actually try to change. They try to change these different islands and an archipelago into one single island. But now we see that in 2050, so this area, that this flooding and the low-lying area, the very pattern of this particular region, we find is now actually posing the new problems or different threats rather for us, and becoming more prone to flooding and more prone to submergence as far as the climate change is concerned. So this is how I, with these examples, I want to state that the process and pattern are extremely related to each other and they cannot be separated from each other. At the same time, geography cannot be just considered as a space or as a stage over which the drama of history unfolds. So geography is not a passive player, but it is very much an active player, as we have seen through these examples, that geography acts as like a co-actor rather in the drama of change, and not just a stage over which the history plays its own drama. So these history and geography coming together or converging together plays a very important role. And obviously this convergence takes place through people. So finally it is the people who are the agents of change. It is people who initiate process, make the patterns, and this pattern further initiate the processes. All the actions that we now need to take to avoid this sea level rise and the associated submergence. Okay, so that is the result of the pattern itself that was created by a process during the colonial period. And this convergence therefore of history and geography is very important to understand. As Baker said, what is required is historically informed geographical studies of the present and geographically informed studies of the past. So this convergence actually is highly required. Otherwise, if we compare the map of Mumbai Islands in 1890s with 2050, we find that the future patterns actually are going to be our past. And what's the best example? What's the best example, or what the best uh, uh, what the best example where the space and time actually converge? So the future map of Mumbai actually resembles the past map of Mumbai. So that kind of situation, if we really want to avoid, what we need is looking at convergence instead of divergence, looking at more complementarities instead of conflicts, looking more towards the frontiers between the disciplines or between the two perspectives, instead of looking towards the subject as subject and drawing a boundary between them. That certainly will lead to disasters even in the policy making and overall our understanding of our world. uh, uh, these are my references, some important references that especially include B. Arunachalam sir's Mumbai by the Sea, the work by Ishrat Alam on the Dutch East India Company, and the Alan Baker's very important work, Geography and History, Bridging the Divide. So these are some of my significant reference. And also Om Prakash's work on the Dutch factory at Wengurla in 17th century was important. And the geographical imagination story that I was talking about was based on a paper by Reading in 2018 in Journal of Historical Geography on making Bombay Island. So those who are interested in going further or delving deep into these examples and get more new perspectives, these references can certainly be referred to. Thanks a lot for giving this opportunity to me. I again thank Shilahar Heritage Services and Sandeep Dahisarkar for giving this opportunity to me. Thanks a lot.